Jeremy Joseph Christian. Case number 17CR34550. Mr. Christian is present. He is in custody. He's represented by counsel Mr. Schull and Mr. Smith.
Before we do that, though, I must remind our visitors today here in court that per Uniform Trial Court Rule 3.150, you must remain seated until the jury has left the room.
Jeremy Christian was arrested for the fatal stabbing of two men on a Max light rail train in Portland, Oregon, in May 2017. He killed 53-year-old retired Army officer Ricky John Best and 23-year-old Taliesin Murden Namkai Meche. A third victim, 21-year-old Micah Fletcher, was also stabbed but survived the attack. What happens next marks the beginning of a horrifying chain of events. Jeremy Christian is seen on camera shouting anti-Muslim and racist slurs at two black teenage girls. His outburst quickly drew the attention of other passengers, who stepped in to protect the terrified teens, now huddled at the back of the train. But as tensions rose, so did the danger. Christian pulled out a knife, began threatening those around him, and then, in a sudden burst of violence, carried out a deadly attack. And, shockingly, the nightmare didn't end there. Here's Christian as he walks away from the scene. After just 12 seconds of chaos and bloodshed, he jumped off the train at the next transit stop. But he didn't get far. Several brave passengers trailed him while calling 911. When police arrived, Christian didn't show remorse. Instead, he proudly confessed to killing two people. But as disturbing as the attack was, what came next in the courtroom would leave the judge and jury completely stunned. Christian was hit with 2 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted murder, but the horror didn't stop there. In court, he showed zero remorse. In fact, he doubled down on his rage, going so far as to threaten the life of one of the victim's family members right there in the courtroom. During the trial, as one of the victim's relatives delivered a powerful impact statement, the courtroom fell silent until Christian broke it. This was his chilling response, revealing just how twisted and unrepentant he truly was. Christian was ultimately handed 2 consecutive life sentences, but the courtroom revelations didn't stop there. During the trial, disturbing details from his past surfaced. Just a day before the fatal stabbings, Christian had reportedly assaulted a woman and hurled racial slurs on another train. A self-proclaimed white nationalist and far-right extremist, his history of violence and hate was undeniable. The judge tacked on an additional 25 years to his sentence for these other charges. But as shocking and disrespectful as Christian was, another case takes things to an even darker level: Randall Moore. Now, we take you inside the Polk County courtroom, where Moore stands trial for the brutal murder of his ex-wife, Therese Ann Marie Lynch. In November 2011, Moore kidnapped, sexually assaulted, and murdered Lynch in a calculated act of revenge. It all began when Lynch tried to escape Moore's grip, filing a protective order after leaving him. But Moore wasn't the kind of man to let go. He turned her attempt at freedom into a terrifying hostage situation. This is Officer Todd Rowland, the first to respond to the desperate cries coming from the apartment. Moments later, Moore opened fire, shooting him at point-blank range. Incredibly, Officer Rowland survived the attack, but it was a split second that nearly cost him his life. In a disturbing 911 call, Moore calmly laid out his twisted justification for murdering his wife. As the standoff unfolded, police finally breached the home and took him into custody. In the courtroom, as Judge Joel Novak confirmed the jury's verdict, guilty on all counts, Moore gave nothing more than a silent nod, cold and emotionless. The judge gave the floor to the victim's family to read their impact statements. But what followed was one of the most shocking and disrespectful moments ever witnessed in a courtroom. As Therese Ann Lynch's heartbroken mother took the stand and tearfully delivered her statement, Moore couldn't keep his mouth shut. Instead, he interrupted her in the most callous way. Listen closely as Moore brazenly cuts in during her emotional testimony. But Moore wasn't finished. When given the chance to speak, he showed no remorse for his actions. Instead, he coldly told the victims' families that he felt no regret and even tried to justify his heinous crimes. The closest thing to an apology came when he briefly addressed Officer Todd Rowland, whom he had shot. But Judge Novak wasn't having it. He tore into Moore, condemning his monstrous behavior and expressing his disbelief at the depths of his heartlessness. In the end, Moore was sentenced to 3 life terms for the murder of Therese Ann Lynch and an additional 25 years for shooting Officer Rowland. That's an incredibly long time to spend behind bars, but is it worse than life sentences with no chance of ever getting out? That was the fate of Camilla Gamet. The 31-year-old Camilla Gamet is on trial for the brutal murder of her 38-year-old boyfriend, Marcel Hill. The couple, who lived together in Michigan, saw their relationship take a violent turn in May 2018 when Gamet, in a fit of rage, attacked Hill. She trashed their apartment, using whatever she could find as a weapon. When police arrived, called by concerned neighbors, they found Hill dead and Gamet drenched in his blood. Among the evidence recovered were a bloody frying pan, a knife covered in blood, and a shattered floor lamp. Prosecutors argued that she had stabbed Hill multiple times, but what came next in the courtroom was even more shocking. During her trial, Gamet claimed that she mistook her boyfriend for an intruder and stabbed him in self-defense. However, her story quickly fell apart under scrutiny. She would have recognized Hill or his voice if that had truly been the case. Her defense could have held weight if Hill had only sustained 1 or 2 stab wounds, but the evidence painted a much darker picture. Gamet had stabbed Hill 12 times and repeatedly struck him with the frying pan. Yet she stuck to her story, insisting it was all in self-defense and that she was the real victim. Here's Gamet unflinchingly maintaining her version of events. Judge John McBain wasn't buying Gamet's claims. Then Diana Banks, a member of Hill's family, was called to the stand to deliver a victim impact statement. What happened next was truly chilling. As Hill's aunt took the stand and began reading the heartbreaking statement, Gamet's response was nothing short of shocking. She showed no remorse, rolling her eyes, smirking, and even smiling as the words from her victim's own family filled the room. When the aunt finished, Gamet's reaction said it all. This time, Judge McBain had enough. He threatened to tape Gamet's mouth shut if she continued interrupting the victim's family, but her defiance didn't stop there. In the end, court officers couldn't find any duct tape, allowing Aunt Diana to finish her statement. But by then, Gamet's disruptive behavior had already fueled the prosecutor's anger. Before delivering her sentence, Judge McBain didn't hold back. He made it crystal clear exactly what he thought of Gamet and the horrific crime she had committed. The court took Gamet's history of domestic abuse into account, ultimately sentencing her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But the disrespect doesn't end there. Another case emerges with a similar sentence, Keith Allen Ferguson, and it only gets darker from here. This is 40-year-old Keith Allen Ferguson, insert clip from 000 to 006, who police say brutally killed his wife, Tiffany Ferguson, and her father, James Weber, in November 2014. Hailing from Kalkaska County, Michigan, Ferguson faces 12 felony charges, including first- and second-degree murder and kidnapping. The tragedy began when 42-year-old Tiffany decided to end her 17-year marriage to Keith. During a heated argument over the divorce, Keith assaulted Tiffany, then shot and killed her right in front of their 4 children. But it didn't stop there. Cold and unmoved, Keith drove the children to Tiffany's parents' house, where he shot and killed her father, James. After the murder, he fled to a neighboring house where he took a 59-year-old woman hostage and barricaded himself inside. The standoff lasted for 7 agonizing hours before Keith finally surrendered and released the hostage. When he stood in court, it became clear. He showed no remorse for the horrific acts he'd committed. During his trial, Ferguson seemed completely uninterested in the proceedings. He often cursed at the judge, court officials, and anyone else in the room, showing a complete lack of respect for the gravity of the situation. Before the judge handed down his sentence, Tiffany's best friend, Carla Seating, took the stand to read the victim impact statement. She shared how Tiffany had lived in constant fear of Keith, always aware that he was a danger to her and those around him. In a chilling moment, Keith revealed that he had no intention of ever seeing or communicating with his children again. This led Judge George Mertz to question his sanity. As part of a plea deal, Keith pleaded guilty to the murders of his wife and father-in-law, with the other 10 charges being dropped. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Just when you think humanity can't sink any lower, we encounter one of the most malicious cases ever, Ronnie O'Neill III.
I saw my dad holding a shotgun and my mom screaming at him.
This is 29-year-old Ronnie O'Neill III, who stands in court for the brutal double murder of his 9-year-old daughter, Ron Nevaeh O'Neill, and 33-year-old girlfriend, Kenyatta Barron, in Riverview, Florida. On the night of March 18, 2018, Ronnie shot Barron dead, then viciously attacked his daughter with an axe, killing her too. But the horror didn't end there. He also stabbed his 8-year-old son, Ronnie O'Neill IV, critically wounding him. Earlier that evening, Barron had called 911, screaming for help before the call abruptly cut off. Less than 10 minutes later, Ronnie called 911 himself, claiming he was being attacked by white demons and accusing Barron of trying to kill him. He then gave his home address. Thinking his family was dead, Ronnie poured gasoline throughout the house and set it on fire. Miraculously, his son managed to escape, suffering from both burns and stab wounds. Detective Mike Blair was there to assist him and ensured he received medical care. Fortunately, he survived. After setting the house ablaze, Ronnie fled the scene, but police eventually caught up with him and arrested him. You might think someone who committed such horrific acts would show some remorse or at least try to appear pleasant in front of the judge and jury. But think again. Ronnie's trial began in 2021, and he insisted on representing himself, even after being deemed psychologically fit to do so. What unfolded next was almost unimaginable. During the trial, Ronnie cross-examined his own son, who had fully recovered from the stab wounds and burns his father had inflicted, while the boy testified as a key witness for the prosecution. Despite his son's testimony, Ronnie insisted the boy had lied about the events and claimed that the recording presented by the prosecution was forged.
I just saw my dad holding a shotgun and my mom screaming at him.
And your father had a shotgun. What happened next? What did he do?
My mom ran in my sister's room. My mom ran in my sister's room and turned into the closet. And then my dad said to come here.
At first, Ronnie tried to claim he was acting in self-defense, filing motions to back up his case, but the judge swiftly rejected them. Ultimately, Ronnie was found guilty of 7 charges, including 2 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of aggravated child abuse, and 1 count of attempted first-degree murder. But even after his conviction, Ronnie refused to let it go. At his sentencing, he shockingly admitted that he felt no remorse for his horrific crimes. Before Ronnie was sentenced, Judge Michelle Sisko, who has nearly 2 decades of experience in the judicial system, had this to say: "If you thought these cases were disrespectful, watch this."